You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Kivlevitz, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
Shalom, this is To Stir with Love, a criminal justice reform podcast. We have an incredible lineup here today. Even if we'd only have one of our guests, it would be incredible. Whether my cohort in this whole program, Rabbi Kolakowski, who is the chief chaplain in Waymart prison in Waymart, Pennsylvania, or Rabbi Yitzchak Shimon, who is the CEO of Hinda Helps, a institution that deals with incarcerated individuals in every stage, helping them, supporting them from the initial arrest all the way to reentry, helping them and their family. And especially we have with us Judge David Avraham Voluck, who is a sitting judge, not in what we would call the standard judicial system that we have been talking about for many, many weeks here. The judicial system that we know needs help and needs reform in many ways. He is actually a judge in a court of indigenous persons, a tribal court in Alaska, where he sits as and what is your official title, Judge David? What is your official title, so we know how to even speak with you?
Most folks call me Judge V because my last name's a little weird for folks. So that works. But the official names is presiding judge for St. Paul Island in the Bering Sea. And I'm a temporary chief judge here in Sitka, Alaska, mentoring some new tribal citizens to hopefully take over my position.
So you actually have two hats, right?
St. Paul Island's an extremely interesting place. Their traditional name is Unangan, but you would be more familiar with Aleuts. And they were in first contact with the Russian colonists and furriers. And it eventually did not go so well. And so these folks were enslaved because they were incredibly skillful hunters of fur-bearing mammals. And the Russians, in their big boats and with their muskets, couldn't quite catch the little critters. And so they enslaved these folks and moved them onto St. Paul Island.
To basically be slave labor to catch these the furry animals so the Russians could have their big hats and right? And the women could have their coats. And
their stoles, yes. And so they are a small island isolated out in the Bering Sea, and probably 98% Ali or Unangan.
So even though they were sort of like taken away from the mainland, this has now become now that the Russians are gone, this has become their place of living, and they live according to the Aleut traditions, correct?
Well, yes. So they were, for good or for ill, has become their traditional homeland, even though they're not originally from there. So it's kind of an interesting situation. And they do live according to a lot of the traditional ways. But like I said, they were first greeters, the first in contact, and were heavily missionized by the Russian Orthodox Church. And so they are now also citizens of the state of Alaska and the United States of America. So they wear many hats, I guess, is what I want to say.
So it would be a misnomer to say that you are just a judge of tribal law, because it sounds like they have a potpourri of various influences governing them. And what is it that you, before we get to the the indigenous people, what we call, you'll be mochel, the Indian law, which I know is a verboten term, what you are practicing on St. Paul Island is standard Alaskan state law justice, or it's justice of a different sort that you are meting out?
Right. Well, it's an amazingly creative opportunity if you're catching the drift. So I'm given a broad canvas to paint on, and I have various laws to draw on, but the tribe's court is the tribe's sovereign court. So no other law applies there. State law or federal law could be persuasive. And someone could argue you should follow something like this, but it is the tribe's internal law that applies. And, some situations can be confusing because there's the Russian Orthodox traditions, there's the older Unangan traditions, and then there's the Western that has come in. And so I guess my job is to make the Shabbos Cholent and come out with a solution that folks can live with and feel that is right. And so I get to draw on all these different ingredients to come up with my decisions.
So it's not like you were, so in other words, it's not like you had to immerse yourself and become slavishly connected to any certain system, but you're familiar enough that you understand what the conversation is, what the arguments are, and then you use Solomonic Jewish wisdom, so to speak, to figure out what makes the most sense. And when you sit there in this tribunal, are you basically ruling by yourself, or do you have some elders that are there with you?
That's a great question. I've sat on appellate panels, and I am there with other tribal judges, and one in particular was an elder of mine. But the two courts that I'm primarily sitting on now are, for good or for ill, single judge presiding. And so it's just me. However, if I feel like I'm uncertain and feeling like I'm out on a not strong branch, I can call upon elder advisors, and they even have elder courts that I can certify a question to. Now, they will advise me, but the final decision has to be mine. So I can't just rubber stamp what they say. But there's resources to help me when I'm not sure what to do.
So we've been talking about your work in St. Paul Island, but also Sitka together, or we're just zeroing right now? I thought we were talking only about the St. Paul part of it.
Well, they're very similar.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, they're very similar jurisdictions.
So what you just described in St. Paul Island, you mete out a similar type of justice when you are in Sitka, in the same way, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So, tribal courts, what the Chiddush that they bring to the table, and maybe Rabbi Scheinman will groove on this, is it's the parlance now, the in buzzword is restorative justice. And many different venues are borrowing circles as a way of peacemaking and a restorative justice ideals instead of just punitive justice, and not rehabilitating the person as a member of the community. And in small villages, you don't have the luxury of banishing someone because they stepped in the wrong stuff, if you catch my drift. And so over the millennia, Native people have had to figure out how to repair and reintegrate folks. And so all of these new buzzwords are really based on Native indigenous justice systems that have existed since time immemorial.
Now, Judge, we had a conversation last week when we were planning this, and you mentioned sort of an infamous case that sort of underscored what would have been the native approach. Do you remember what you were talking about?
I do.
So why don't you mention that case and talk about how that's reflective of this, what seems to be newfangled restorative justice, but it's actually rooted in, as you say, the native culture. Talk about that case for a second.
Well, before we go there, we had a law having to do with a murder, and I believe it was in the territory of South Dakota. And Spotted Tail killed Lone Wolf. I keep forgetting their names, which is a shame. But there was a murder, and
was one of them Rocky Raccoon?
No, and they were both tribal citizens. Okay, it was native on native violence, and they wanted to take him to federal court, and the folks who are intelligent about Indian law and international native law argued that no, he needs to be brought to tribal court. And they were correct. And the crime took place on tribal land. There was no reason why it should be handled in, forgive my slur, just not my words, but white man's court. Why would it be there? And so it was removed to tribal court. And the tribal sentence is restored. It's designed, even though it's impossible to bring someone back to the living, at least that we're aware of right now, to restore the family and to make them whole, particularly economically, because when you take a life, you take a breadwinner. And so their sentence involved that the murderer owed the family quality blankets, provisions. It was not a cheap sentence, but it was repair. And it hit the news that this was the tribal resolution for a murder. And it was pointed out that these savages must not have the authority or the seichel, the intellect, to handle serious crimes like murder. And the long and short of it was the adversarial solution was to hang him. And I thought that was ironic because when you really think about hanging, and forgive me for a second, it's an incredibly brutal way to take someone's life. And yet the folks who are championing wrapping a rope around you and doing this thing were calling the ones with the restorative sentence the savages. And it provided a moment of insight for me of the kind of justice I wanted to pursue in my lifetime. Is with tribal court. Tribal folks walk into the courtroom. I'm the one sitting on the bench because I don't look very tribal necessarily as far as being indigenous or Native American. But amazingly, I've been accepted. And I think part of that, as you had read, was both Sitka and St. Paul were missionized by the Russian Orthodox Church. So having a beard and a little black hat on your head is actually very familiar looking. Mm-hmm. So I look a bit like a priest and have had funny experiences where folks confess to me, but wrong priesthood.
I see. Okay.
The other piece is it's not necessarily pushing against what happened as far as the taking of jurisdiction of major crimes and by outside jurisdictions. It's more of what Sandra Day O'Connor was talking about is, how's that working for us? Okay. And you see in our prison systems and our penal systems, it's not working very well. So these lessons, as far as restorative justice, their time has come, almost because the other system is breaking under its own weight. We need a different solution. And so going in this direction is a very interesting. From this case, there was such a public outcry about how soft and savage the tribal resolution was that the federal government passed what's called the Indian Major Crimes Act. And they swooped jurisdiction away from tribal courts over major crimes like rape and murder and terrible assaults. And so they, in a way, extinguished tribal inherent sovereignty over resolving their justice concerns. So, from this famous case.
Yes, and what you're doing is really pushing back, using what you know from the vestiges of tribal law, the spirit and idea, and you are finding that the elders are agreeing with you. Somehow you, and we're going to get to your story in a second, an Orthodox Jew from Philadelphia is somehow able to act as an arbiter from these sovereigns and to see what ideas can work and wonder how they can be applied. But I think most of the people listening they don't see you, but we see you, Judge, and you look like a rabbi. You look as right. You're wearing the kippah of that. Would Kosovitsky would wear such a kippah when he would lead the services on the high holy days. You know what I'm saying? So the question here is how does this Yid from Philly somehow come to sit as a
I like to start the story in utero, because like all beginnings, we got to start in the beginning, right? I had heard once a midrash that a malach, an angel, teaches you the entire Torah while you're inside of your mother's belly by candle. And then right as we're born, the angel gives us a little potch under the nose, and we kind of forget everything, and we're born as a babe. But what I like about the story is it's strange, but that in a way we kind of already know a lot of things in our bones. And we're spending this lifetime kind of relearning. And it's not so much learning new things, but we're uncovering what we already kind of knew, if you follow me. And so with that, I guess I was a lot of Jewish people, neshamalas, are on fire for the concept of justice. And so I came out of my mother's womb remembering I must seek justice, and I can't stand injustice. And I think this can be the fire that drives a lot of Jews to be at the front of the line in marches, and the authors of every kind of ism that's out there to try to fix things. This tikkun olam de malchut shakai. We just have a burning itch to try to fix that which is broken. And so if you want to look for injustice, all you have to do is pick up our United States history book and take a look at westward expansion and manifest destiny and sea to shining sea. And you see that there was a steamrolling of legal rights and the physical bodies of people who were here. So as a younger man, looking for my own way of life, I was searching for roots. And I was looking for old cultures, ancient civilizations, if you will. And I was looking to do justice. And so Hashem had a good smirk and a laugh, and he slowly led this suburban Jew all the way to the coast of Alaska. And eventually was immersed with the folks, the tribal folks that I was working with. So two things. One, there was an elder, silver-haired Tlingit elder who would visit me every day in my office. And he did not speak a whole lot, so he had to teach me patience with silence, which us Jewish folks don't necessarily have naturally. Can send you through the roof.
Very much on display here on our program. Yes.
Exactly. But he would repeat kind of a saying to me often, and he would say, David, our people, our history, our language, our way of life, it's very important. You must help us, okay? So I felt like an itinerant carpenter here assisting with my legal training. And the Tlingit people that I was working with here in Southeast do have a tradition of culturally adopting folks that maybe they value. And so, like Jewish mothers, Tlingit mothers love to adopt doctors and lawyers. So here was this young lawyer, and I was approached by an elder. She was not a chief. She was very spiritual and a leader of the people. And she did lose a son to a drowning accident, and his name was David. So I'm not the spitting image of David, I can tell you that. But she felt I was a Gilgul or a reincarnation of her son. And so she asked permission to culturally adopt me. And it was a very high honor. And I agreed. And before the ceremony, she had the name of a deceased chieftain picked out for me in Tlingit, because they name folks like Jews do to carry on the name. So I was not to become a chief. I was to be named after a chief. And she was visited in a dream by her grandmother. And they were talking about me in the dream. And when the grandmother asked my name, and Jesse gave her the name she picked out for me, the grandmother grew stern and said he must get his own name because he's from his own tribe. And when Jessie, the woman who was to adopt me, awoke, she came to me and said, I was visited and I want to know what tribe you are from. And from there, Mark's words clicked in my head. David, our people, our culture, our language, our way of life, very important. You must help us. Rang true for the Indians I worked for, but it rang true for the Jewish people that I was born into. And so began an entire process of reclaiming and tshuva of, here I was looking for ancient roots, searching the earth for old wisdom traditions. And by the grace of God, I was born into one of the oldest, wisest traditions on the face of the earth. And so I dove in wholeheartedly.
So once you were challenged by or asked by your adoptive mother for what your roots were, you then said, did you go back to your parents? Did you open up? What did you do?
Listen, I was raised in a conservative Jewish neighborhood in Philly. And so I kind of knew who I was, but not really. And so if an elder asks you about something, you kind of want to be able to answer more than just what I had been given as a young person. And so I started to research, who are we? What tribe am I from? And what are the teachings of that tribe? What is my language? How do I want to raise my children? All those, what about our way of life? Because assimilation and conquering doesn't just afflict indigenous peoples. It's a process going on for all peoples, and figuring out what's tomorrow going to look like? And I'm one of those weird people that think, well, a tree is strong if it's got good roots. So you can have all the flowers you want on top, but when the wind blows, you need roots. And so that doesn't necessarily mean go into a time machine and go back in time, but woe to people who don't learn from their ancestors.
And that caused you to go to yeshiva, right? This is you, or you decided that you were going to take a sabbatical and go study?
Yes. Yes. So I decided to turn myself into a hothouse for tomatoes, a Balei Tshuva yeshiva, and I took a sabbatical from being a judge in the practice of law to learn as much as I could about our people, our history, our language, our way of life. And then, Baruch Hashem, I started having little kidlets, and we all know when the kids come, so do the bills.
Now, for Rabbi Shaiman's edification, the yeshiva that you went to was?
Tiferes Bechorim in Morristown, New Jersey.
Which was part of the Lubavitch network, right?
Correct. So that was part of my process, my repatriation process, was connecting with the Chabad Shliach in Anchorage, Alaska, a wonderful man and his wife, Yosef and Esty Greenberg. And they had a profound influence on my growth as a Jew.
And you spent long enough there, obviously, to not just discover aspects of Yiddishkeit, but also to train yourself in Talmudic thinking and learning.
I have Spielkes in my Häusen, so I have a hard time sitting, but you can't help to sharpen what we were given called the Yiddish cup. So I said, I think from that little angel inside our mama's belly, we are able to digest law and deal with vagueness and ambiguities, and to ask questions and to try to dig. What I really love about being Jewish also is the chicken soup common sense of our ancestors, and let's get down to business. So there's the flowery aspect of law, but I really love tribal court because it's a problem-solving forum, and I like just sitting down with people and saying, let's talk turkey.
Some Yiddish balabustas to get together. Came back to Jessie. Do you consider her your mom, Jessie?
No, listen, gentlemen, I'm a Jewish boy. I only have one mom, and you know it. But she was my adoptive mom, and a friend, and a teacher. I would say mostly to me, she was a teacher.
And so did you convey to her that you were from the priestly tribe?
I may have told her that. I will say that because of the very strong missionary influence in Alaska, being Jewish meant we were from the chosen people, and I was asked to lead blessings at meetings and to bless the food very often. And Tlingit and Hebrew sound very similar. They have similar sounds. And so they're some of the only people, when I tell them my daughter's name is Nechama, they go, "Oh, Nechama?" And everybody else completely butchers it.
I see.
I will tell you a funny story. I was once in the Carolinas for a judicial training, and they were having a pulled pork festival. I don't know if you know what the heck that is.
I'm a Southern boy, so I know a little bit about.
Wow. I never heard of such a thing. So I walk up and they have a chazer from Chazerland on the spit, turning over the fire. And they say, and now we'd like our esteemed guest from Alaska to bless the meal. And 40 people step back so that I can give the bracha on this unbelievable scene here. So I just threw down a little modani. They liked the Hebrew, and that's what they needed.
Here, so modani on the Rabbi Scheinman, I know that you have other responsibilities. What would you like to ask Judge Voluck?
Well, I think if there's any way that other judges could be trained that work just in regular courts doing this type of service in the regular American system. If it's working, this is something that slowly but surely, make a pilot program somewhere. And I was wondering if that's something that you've thought about, or if you've reached out to anybody.
Interestingly, the St. Paul Court is a pilot program, definitely for many other tribes. I don't know if our outreach has jumped over the aisle into state and federal courts. We have, I cannot pronounce it in Unangan. I think it's Tian Kanguch Court, it's called. And it's a healing to wellness court. Again, giving folks a chance to stay in the community, because there's another weird thing I'll describe very quickly, and that is Indian removal. Removal was one of the major steps of clearing the West for American expansion. And so it leaves post-traumatic stress disorder in indigenous people's spines to be removed from their land. And so the high incarceration rates, particularly in Alaska and Indian country all over the United States, is a kind of weird, subtle removal that's going on. So many Native folks are being lifted out of their community and incarcerated in penal institutions. So there's this massive removal going on. And so our program's designed to try to keep folks on island, ideally surround them with holistic healing, because what we're finding, and I'm sure Rabbi Scheinman is seeing this, is a lot of criminal behavior is really antisocial behavior. Okay, so follow me on this. In law school, we're taught intent of a crime is called in Latin mens rea, or like a serious Yetzer Hara, okay? It's an evil intent, actually. It's not an urge, it's an intent. And so many of the folks in our penal system don't have evil intents. They have antisocial behaviors and habits that are running them afoul of society, and we're not quite sure where to put them, and breaking into a store is a crime, and so we put them in jail. But we're not really getting to the disease of what's driving this antisocial behavior. And part of what we're finding is that it's trauma, and especially historical trauma. And if you're going to understand that concept, Jews and Indians can talk to you about what it means to survive a major, major calamity and to have historical trauma passed down from our caregivers, and some say even in our genetics and epigenetics. These traumas are passed down, they hurt, and without healing them, folks can turn to self-medication. They need to dull this pain from trauma, and then next comes alcohol, opiates, drugs, and the story goes on. And now we have someone in jail as a criminal, but really what's going on is medication of trauma. And so our program is designed to heal folks, not punish them. Yeah. And I want to say, and then I'll shut up in a moment. Sorry, I get going.
No.
In general, we have saved some lives. And it has had incredible successes that have moved me. But I would be lying if I said if I told you we don't have struggles. And if we didn't have some failures that broke my heart. So it's not a silver bullet, but it's a much more humane, educational, and healing approach to antisocial behaviors, which often come from medicating trauma.
Well, I think what you're saying, first of all, about this intergenerational trauma is a very common idea now, and it's become very in vogue, especially as vis-a-vis the African-American community, that they are, despite that there is no slavery, that they are still suffering in a way from this pre-generational trauma that is carrying over, despite the fact that many of them have been raised in relative freedom. But there's, and we are hearing this a lot in the United States. So it isn't. I think America is ready to hear this, and they are already hearing this. And studies again have, in terms of ourselves, again in terms of the Jewish situation, there are psychological studies about a second generation Holocaust families that also sort of indicate that, but not on the level that you're saying. And I think that is something that, but I do think America has embraced that. What I'd like to wrap things up here, and I think we could spend hours with you, because you are not only do you have an incredible story, but you speak in a way that I understand why the Native Americans listen, because the spirit takes you. When you begin, there's when you're holding the conch, or when you're holding the when you've got the the totem in your hand, I can see that what you speak in a way that resonates. But I want to get sort of nuts and bolts with you. Can you give me an example of a case that you presided over? Give us like a standard case. I mean, not a standard case that you would be called in on, and how, and quickly explain like what your ideas would be in the resolution. I mean, Judge Judy and Judge Wapner and all these other
of a lot of what I do. So what a situation that arose recently and is similar for a lot of different families, although the facts will be different, was a man and a woman came together in a relationship, and it didn't last, and they had a child. Okay. So now we have two separated parents. And in this case, the mother was diagnosed as being mentally ill. And so she was found to be an unsafe caretaker for this little Native child. And so the father stepped up and took over raising the child when he was very, very young. And at that time, the father was dating a woman. They were not married. And so this woman comes into this little child's life when he's about 1 year old. And she too raises him his entire life. And then the father and his new partner have another child, and who's also raised in the home, who's this boy's brother. Fair enough? And so at around 13, the father is lost at sea. Okay, and this, if you're hearing a common theme, unfortunately, the sea gives and the sea taketh. And drownings are an unfortunate piece of death around here in Alaska.
Because the Aleuts, they're still working in some sort of trade they're still going on these boats. In other words,
oftentimes, right? Yes. And he was Tlingit, and he was a fisherman. So he makes his living out at sea, and he was lost at sea. And so everyone was terribly bereaved. And, this boy is, of course, crying on the shoulder of his mother, but she's not really his mother. She's just the woman who's been raising him his entire life. His real mother swoops down from up north, and she's been diagnosed with very serious mental illness. And her rights were never terminated. And she says, "Give me my son." And the police say, "Oh my God, she's kind of right." And so this young man was whisked away from his family, from the traditional lands, and the only mother he's ever really known, right days after his father is pronounced missing and dead. And he is taken by his biological mother, who is disturbed. And so my court is often called in by, say, the psychological mother to get custody or guardianship so that she can bring this child back home. And because of, so it's a complicated
this mother is also from the native people. The one with
she actually is not, but she has been culturally adopted like me and is heavily engaged in the community. But as far as being a tribal citizen, she is not, but she's a part of our community. She's in, and she always fostered this child's tribal identity.
I'm talking about the one who swooped down. She was.
Oh, she is native. She was a tribal woman. And so that helps for jurisdiction, but she was sadly afflicted with an unbelievable mental illness, which made her dangerous. And so my court has to patch up these situations for families.
So what did you rule in this case?
I ruled that both the mental illness of the biological mother presented a clear and present danger to the child, and that the psychological parentage of this mother who was never married, she's not really a stepmother, so she's in a twilight zone legally. And so I recognized her as family, even though she didn't have the blood and even though she didn't have the ring on her finger. And so that's the flexibility of tribal court, allows me to rule the right answer. Even though in Western court, the mom had all the authority and power in the world, if you follow.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
And then for healing to wellness, my cornflakes is folks who are in and out of the justice system, and particularly on St. Paul due to alcohol. Self-medicating with alcohol, and so our job is to help them to get sober.
So basically, it's like disorderly conduct. They
correct.
So in other words, under the influence of alcohol, they'll smash a window, they'll get into a fight,
slash tires. But when they're sober, they're quality people.
Okay, so
you know,
is it an Alaska State Trooper who arrests them on St. Paul Island?
Well, yeah. The nice part is we have a great relationship with the city, the municipal police, and this municipality of St. Paul, and so when they have a choice, they can exercise what's called field discretion, where to send the problem, and thankfully, 99 out of 100 times, they'll send the problem to me to try to early intervene and problem solve so that someone's not left with a scar on their criminal history.
So who pays for, and that, let's say this fellow slashes the tires and, does this damage and havoc. So what do you rule in that case? First of all, the guy who had his tires slashed, who's going to pay for that? Insurance? Is there some way that he's going to get compensation? I understand that the person who acted under influence,
right,
wasn't necessarily aware of everything they were doing. Sort of like we have the halachos of Purim, when somebody acts under the influence. No, it's actually, that's the way it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch, that for certain small claims you actually can't claim damages. But so there is a precedent about when someone acts in such a way that you can't necessarily, but that's on a Purim day when everybody is doing it. Normally, it's not considered a p'tur. So what would you rule in such a case, or what did you?
Okay, well, I had a case very much like this, and I think the first rule of manners is to fix what you broke. We learned that one again by our mamas, and it's in the Torah, and it's in traditional indigenous law. So I rule, in particular, there was one case where somebody was drunk and pounding on a door and broke it off its hinges. And getting a door to St. Paul Island and having it fixed is not a simple matter. And so it came to a pretty hefty price tag. And so that's just part one. You've got to pay it back. And so we'll issue a debt, and oftentimes folks don't pay on it. I oftentimes give folks the option, if you don't got cash money, you can give back to the community, and I value their hours. And so they will have to work on behalf of the island tribal community, and we will value their hours, and they will work off the debt.
So therefore, the guy whose door was smashed will get money from the community chest, which will be paid. That abscess of the money from the community chest will be filled by the work that the drunk fellow will do for the community.
Correct. Yes. And then there's certain times where, say, every resident in Alaska gets what's called a permanent fund dividend, a PFD, or there might be other kinds of payouts of, let's put it this way, free money. And so I will seek to garnish those kinds of
some of the welfare or reparation type money that's being given to some of these persons. There is money somewhere. So you're going to be able to discover that and funnel it back to the person who was damaged.
Correct. And since it's kind of free money, we're not kicking anyone in the knees. It was like, it's a windfall. So by living in Alaska, I get a windfall every year of their oil royalties.
I see.
So don't tell me you don't got money to fix that guy's door. You know what I mean?
I see.
So, yeah.
So, and that, of course, that takes knowledge of all the labyrinth of laws that are involved there to be able to tap into that, literally.
And that's where I can help. Many tribal judges, and I think rightfully so, are lay judges, meaning they're not attorneys. But I was able to learn a few tricks that can be helpful to the tribal courts I sit on. And as I mentioned kind of at the beginning of our talk, my job has always been to mentor and train tribal citizens to take over. So I never got into this to be like, oh, well, here's my parnasa. You know?
Do you see yourself, you know, have your students arisen? Do you see yourself like packing up soon?
Well, interestingly, I did have one who took over as chief judge at Sitka, and I stayed on as associate judge. And we worked together as a team. And I have 3 new judges to train. He just retired. So I'm back to being chief judge, and I have 3 new judges. And so my goal in Sitka actually is to work myself out of a job. But the funny thing with St. Paul in particular is folks kind of decided they don't mind having Judge V there. And even though I'm not a member of the tribe and may look a little funny on the bench, I don't have a dog in the fight, if you understand what I'm saying. And St. Paul is an island of 400 people. And so everybody knows everybody's business inside and out. And on top of it, they're often interrelated. So to have a stranger sitting there helping you in the doctor's office doesn't stink. And so even though my mission is to train a younger person to take over for me. Nobody has stepped up, and the island kind of likes that I'm there.
I see. And wow. Well, it sounds like they are. You say the kinder are coming. You have 3 little children. How are they managing out there? I mean, how are they managing there?
Well, unfortunately for my children, they have a bizarre father who's on an interesting path. And I think they've kind of gotten used to it. But it is, I think, a challenge now that they've reached their teenage years to be the only Jew in their high school and one of the only Jews on the island. And wherever we go, we are sometimes the first Jew someone has ever met in their entire life.
That they knew were Jewish. That they knew.
Right, maybe. But, you know, the other half of that, the other angle to that is we are constantly aware of who we are. And so I think that imbues my children with a strong identity. And I'm still waiting to see how it's all going to turn out. But it is a mishmash. And we used to go for holidays to Anchorage or Seattle or even New York to kind of get a shot in the arm, a shot of chicken soup with the major holidays. And since the pandemic, that has been harder, and we've spent more and more time isolated here. And so it'll be interesting, but thank God they're healthy. Thank God they haven't thrown me overboard.
Yes.
And maybe they'll grow up to be bridge builders as well.
And I'm sure they're reaping the benefits of the natural beauty, the fresh air, the type of stuff that we know is good for body and soul as well. Well, Judge, again, I think we could spend a lot of time here with you. I know that you've set the record straight, and you've also given us a way for us to set our records and to maybe put things in a different form. And hopefully people will hear this, will hear your message, and will resonate in ways that we can seek to have incremental and maybe major change. So that's about it.
Can I make one? Just
an Indian, a priest, and a rabbi walk into a bar.
They walk into a podcast together, and
exactly.
You never know what's going to happen. Take care.
Thanks for joining us for another episode from the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a single episode.